Now we have another two interested speakers from the Middle East now. The Rabbi Yonatan, Neril, and sorry if I don't spell it very well. This is one of my expectations, to learn with you how to spell it better, learn together. And thank you, and very honored to have you here with us, sharing about spiritual sustainability for a thriving earth. So we are looking forward to hear you. And also Phoebe talking about SolarPunk, a narrative whose time has come. So I will pass the floor for Rabbi Yonatan Neril. Please bless us with your comments and wisdom about such an important issue like sustainability and the connection to spirituality. 10 minutes for you, and then Phoebe, and a cross conversation with you both and our participants. The floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you, Ines. It's good to be here with you from Jerusalem. I'll actually start by sharing with you a little bit about what's alive in me. Today, my organization, the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, in collaboration with the Elijah Interfaith Institute and some other partners, co-organized an event in Jerusalem. It was an interfaith gathering of religious leaders and clergy calling for peace in Ukraine. And I'm going to speak about spirituality and sustainability, but I know that the war is on the minds of many people. And it was actually one of the more significant days in my life, I have to admit. I'm 41 years old, and for the past 12 years since I started this NGO, we've been sort of swimming upstream to get people to pay attention to religion and ecology. It's a topic that a lot of people think religion is one thing and ecology is another thing, and the two don't have much to do with each other. Even after Pope Francis issued an encyclical called Laudato Si on care for our common home, most people, including many Catholics, haven't sort of embraced the Pope's wisdom as much as he would hope, and as much as some more progressive Catholics would hope. But today I was happy to witness and to have a role in organizing an interfaith gathering that involved 25 religious leaders and clergy, including the Catholic religious leader in Jerusalem and the Holy Land, his Beatitude Patriarch Pizzaballa, as well as Muslim sheikhs and Druze sheikhs and rabbis, including a rabbi representing the chief rabbinate of Israel. And this event was held outside of the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow Square in Jerusalem. And it follows an effort to encourage Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, to speak with Putin to seek peace. And this was an interfaith letter that I was involved in that was signed by 150 world religious leaders, including the Dalai Lama and others. One thing I've come to see is that we can't have ecological sustainability without spirituality. We need spirituality to lead the way in terms of ecological behavior. But we also can't have ecological sustainability without peace and coexistence. In other words, if we achieve, if humanity switches to all renewable energy and everyone composts and everyone, minimizes their airplane travel and their personal automobile travel, and we all eat a plant-based diet. But if we can't get along with each other in a world with, 20,000 nuclear warheads, it doesn't matter if we achieve ecological sustainability. We need to learn to get along with each other. We need to learn to see the image of the other, image of the divine in another human being. See that the other is a brother of a different mother, sister of a different mister. It's not about us versus them. It's about us and them, and how we can come to live sustainably on this planet. And so I did sort of get the feeling today that the source of all being, the one living God, was happy to see 25 religious figures coming together, calling for peace. Among them, Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Druze. So that's sort of one thought. The Bible talks about war and ecology, and I edited and co-authored a book called Eco Bible, which is an ecological commentary on the Hebrew Bible. Volume 1 is on Genesis and Exodus. Volume 2 is on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in there, we talk about a verse from Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19, where the Bible teaches that an Israelite army was commanded not to cut down fruit trees in war, and when they laid siege to a city. And there's different rabbinic commentaries on these verses, chapter 20, verse 19 and 20. But the overall message is that the trees are not party to the conflict. They're not an enemy. They don't have anything to do with the conflict. They're just living. And so therefore it's not proper, and it's actually forbidden for an Israelite army to cut down fruit trees when making a siege on a city. And from these verses in Deuteronomy, the Jewish sages learn a principle that about not wasting and not destroying anything of value to a person, whether it's energy or water or food. In fact, Rabbi Ishmael, writing in the Times of the Talmud, spoke about how if the Bible is concerned about not cutting down fruit trees in war, all the more so that we shouldn't be wasting food. And yet in modern society, about 1/3 of food goes to waste. And one of the sort of chilling aspects of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is that Russia and Ukraine are actually exporting 40% of the world's wheat. They're exporting a similar amount of barley. They're exporting apparently 75% of the world's sunflower oil. And they're also exporting, Russia and Belarus, a lot of the fertilizer that's used in the world. And so, during the coronavirus pandemic, about the number of people living with malnutrition or food scarcity went from about 550 million to 750 million. And now that food prices are the highest they've been in decades, the conflict has the potential to affect many poor people, especially in Africa and the Middle East and South Asia. So, it's all connected. That's one of the things about spirituality and ecology is our interdependence. That, they say if a butterfly flaps its wings in one part of the world, then it has an effect. And actually, we're seeing how interconnected we are, that the conflict isn't just about Russia and Ukraine, it's actually about the whole world, because Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, 6,000 nuclear warheads. And Europeans, I think, acutely feel this, especially those who witnessed Chernobyl, that, the Ukraine has the largest nuclear power plant in Europe with 6 nuclear reactors. And there was just a battle there. So there's a lot of linkages between war and ecology. And there's also linkages between this war and religion in terms of the role of the Russian Orthodox Church and the role it could play in promoting peace. That's why we sent this letter to Patriarch Kirill. And just one other, sort of Bible connection is that it also says in the Bible that an Israelite soldier, if he's going to war, then he would need to bring a small shovel on his belt, because when he would need to go to the bathroom, it wasn't acceptable just to, go to the bathroom on the ground, but he had to cover over his excrement. And based on this verse, they've learned a principle in the Jewish tradition. There's 613 commandments, and this is one of the commandments. Not cutting down a fruit tree is another commandment. And this commandment is understood that if an Israelite soldier has to make sure to cover over his waist in a wartime, then all the more so should we be concerned about how we're treating the earth, both in wartime and in peacetime. Yesterday an ammonia plant was hit in northern Ukraine. And an ammonia explosion can be very devastating. And you get when Peter the Great was expanding Russian territory a couple hundred years ago, we weren't talking about nuclear reactors and huge industrial ammonia plants. So I really get the sense that we're dealing with something that's much bigger now, and that essentially, to conclude, that we're being called on to raise our level of spiritual awareness, that it's not going to work for humanity to continue to live at a low level of spiritual awareness, where there's hatred and fear and violence and high consumerism, and just instant self-gratification and pleasure seeking in the physical. That, from an ecological perspective and from a conflict perspective, that's not going to work. That's not going to work anymore. So this conflict, as well as the ecological crisis, are messaging to us to raise our level of spiritual awareness and to live at a higher level of soul awareness. So I just want to bless us to be able to do that, and to be able to really, strengthen our own sense of center, and to enable the next generation to inherit a livable, thriving, and spiritually aware planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, and for this final conclusion about how much we need this moment to be focused and centered in our soul awareness. I took some notes. See the image of the divine in each human being, and to know how to live with each other in harmony. Thank you for this. I will pass with this. With this, I pass the word to you, Phoebe. What about SolarPunk, and what ecology, sustainability, and taking care of our common house is already happening? Please share with us. Very honored to have you in this afternoon, morning, or night with us. Please, the floor is yours.
Oh, fantastic. It's so good to be here, and it's such an honor to present right after Yonatan. I love everything that you said, and I relate very similarly to the world situation, but from a very different perspective. As a scientist, and I started life as a biologist, and now I actually work on a very spiritual project called Moral Imaginations, which uses imagination to help people connect to a sense of interdependence with the world, a sense of connection to the future generations, and to the more than human world as well. And as you'll see, it's quite SolarPunk, but I'm not going to talk so much about that. Today I'm going to focus on SolarPunk. Actually, just before I share my slides, I wanted to share this, this image that just felt as if it was speaking exactly to Yonatan's presentation. So Ethiopian Orthodox churches have safeguarded pockets of primary forest that grow around them. I just saw this on Twitter, like just before coming on here, and I just thought it was such a beautiful image that, this connection between religion and ecology. And, I have no idea what the source, here's the source. I don't know how accurate this is, but spiritual traditions have been talking about and teaching about our interdependence for so many years, and I feel science is only just catching up. So I just thought it was pertinent to show that image. So my name is Phoebe. I'm a scientist, a social entrepreneur, an activist, and many other things, but I would say largely as a social entrepreneur and a scientist. I started life as a biologist, and here are images of me back when I used to work in a molecular biology lab in 2014, which is around about the time I discovered SolarPunk, and it totally blew my mind, because from a young age, I've been really aware of what we're doing to the planet, and I've felt a strong calling to be in service of changing the way we behave towards each other, towards the world, and I've been confused since I was quite young about why it is that we know exactly what we need to do, and we have all the tools and the technologies to do that, and yet we're still in conversations that seem to loop again and again around, and we're not having the impact that we need to. And so I started life as a scientist, and then I've made this transition over the last 8 years, almost 8-9 years, to working in narratives and imagination and stories, because the more I kind of bang my head against the wall of like, what can be impactful? What's the best thing to do with my life in terms of being of service to changing the way we are in relationship to the planet? I've ended up really believing in the power of stories and imagination to shift people's perspective and to really change people's lives. Like for some people, if they hear a powerful story that allows them to reframe their personal story on the planet and the story of the world, it can really change the whole trajectory of their life. So I run this organization called Moral Imaginations, and we work with organizations and communities and people on imagining different futures and also reimagining their relationship to the world in different ways. And we ask this question: what if imagination could help us create a different future? Which is very, very connected to SolarPunk. So today we're talking about SolarPunk, a narrative whose time has come. I was just wondering, could you just let me know, do you still see the slides when I do this? Great. Okay, so those are my notes. So SolarPunk, a narrative whose time has come. And if you are passionate about SolarPunk, I tweet a lot about the topic. So this is my Twitter, SolarPunk_girl, and I'd love to hear from you on Twitter. But to start, what is SolarPunk? So SolarPunk is an aesthetic, artistic, fashion, architectural, literary, and general cultural movement. So it's a cultural movement that's brought alive by art and by aesthetic. And at the core, it's about envisioning and imagining a new world with a better future. And in this world, we use the imagination and artwork and stories to imagine a world where climate change and racism and war and problems like this have been solved. And so it's an inherently very hopeful movement. And it unites optimism around the power of technology to serve humanity. So it's like, it doesn't reject technology. It's about integrating technology and actually using technology with wisdom. So it unites this with also the inspiration that humans can cooperate and govern in ways that are fair and equitable, and the possibility of caring for the natural non-human world and engaging in regenerating the planet. So I'm going to share some artwork because it's primarily been fueled by artwork. So it's a lot of kind of futuristic art that captures the imagination, especially of the younger generations. It's primarily being driven by generation like Gen Z and Gen Y, millennials like myself, and people who are younger than me. And it's slowly been growing over the past few years as people seek alternatives to the dark visions of the future that have come to dominate our imaginations. And it feels not more relevant than now. As every year, every moment, it seems like there's the newest kind of dark possibility of the future that we face. Here's another one, and you can start to see some of the kind of common themes, often kind of nature and green and plants and vines combined with technology and vertical, a lot of like vertical architecture as we imagine what would happen if we condensed cities and places that we live into vertical ways of living, so that we can regenerate more of the planet. Here's another one. Often, people talk about Singapore being a very good example of a kind of solarpunk city. And there are many different shades of solarpunk, but most tend to share some common themes. So green leafy trees, glass and steel architecture, biomimicry, vertical buildings, solar power, wind turbines. So it's to give you a flavor of this, and also I will talk a bit about why I got so inspired about this in a second. It's really about this uniting of humans, nature, and technology. I just also put some pictures in here of like real architecture. This is a real apartment block in Turin, and this is a vertical forest in Milan. So you can see the kind of beginning of solarpunk futures coming into being. But yeah, so just to boil it down to be really simple, this movement is about nature, humans, and technology. In other words, it's about uniting the best of kind of humans working together, which I feel Bildung, the Bildung movement has so much around this, the innovation and the kind of thinking around this of kind of focusing on well-being and new forms of governance and leadership, social justice, racial justice. So just allow yourself to imagine a world where these three things are all present. So imagine that your kids are going to school and they are learning about well-being and personal development on the curriculum. They are attending a forest school, so a lot of their classes happen outside. They develop a connection to nature from a young age. They learn how to grow food, how to regenerate soil. They protecting areas of natural beauty is central to them. We live in houses that are powered by wind, solar, and tidal energy, renewable energy. We have technology that helps us focus rather than lose our focus and be hijacked all the time. You walk into your house and maybe there's like personalized technology that you wear that tells you that you're feeling quite stressed. So maybe you'd like to meditate. You go out onto your balcony and you have a beautiful view over the ocean, which is clean. And I think it's such an exciting movement because it's quite simple at the core if you think about these three principles, but actually it really provides the scaffolding for our imaginations to go wild. And imagine like instead of turning on the news and being super depressed about the latest, political campaign that's happening where you're going to vote and not feel like your vote is heard. Imagine if we were all participating in citizen assemblies in our bioregions, we had real participatory governance and democracy, our wishes and dreams for how we lived and what happened in our communities were actually listened to, and our technology was co-owned and cooperatively governed. So imagine we were using Facebook, but instead of Mark Zuckerberg and his shareholders deciding on the latest innovations, we were all able to cast our vote in how Facebook operates. And it's really like the sky is the limit in terms of how different the world could be. And the question is, why isn't it like that? And that's why I work in imagination, because I feel the stronger we can imagine this world and make it tangible and bring it alive, the more obvious it becomes that it's crazy that we don't live like that. And the more we can ask the question why, and then do the work to bring it into being. This is just a quote from an article I wrote in 2018, which was actually published on Emerge, which I know is a kind of friend of Bildung. So the new story I and many others envision is one that is deeply human, with nature at the forefront and technology by our side. It's up to us to work out how these three can interact and support each other in creating an integrated, diverse, and holistic future. And it's exciting because I changed my Twitter name to SolarPunk Girl, I think around 2014. So that was 8 years ago. And now just last year, I was interviewed by the BBC. Like suddenly, the BBC is paying attention to SolarPunk. It's featuring in mainstream media outlets like Yes Magazine and as I said, BBC and The Nation. And people are calling for this more optimistic storytelling and a new narrative for technology. So super exciting. And just to give you a little flavor, just this morning, I put this tweet out asking, my Twitter world of, what would you love to hear about when you hear about SolarPunk? And this is some of their answers. So, you can see there's some people who really love the part on technology. So SolarPunk is the perfect representation of positive tech narratives. People would want to hear about how to make your own inverter and PV tech. So this is this kind of DIY technology. Someone wants to hear about housing, the importance of imagination in everybody's day-to-day life, the importance of fostering altruism so that everybody's needs are met, the balance between socio-utopian and techno-utopian vision, and also how Gen Z is key to realizing a SolarPunk future. And so just to give you like a flavor of how many different people can pile into this movement, because there's something in it for everyone, but everybody understands that at the core, it's about human and planetary flourishing, which is difficult to disagree with. So that's just a flavor of it. This is, again, a really great image of the SolarPunk future. On the right-hand side, you've got the beautiful SolarPunk future. On the left-hand side, the world that we want to leave behind. And this is a course that an 8-week course I run on basically SolarPunk, all of the different parts of SolarPunk. So everything from regenerative agriculture to regenerative money, to decentralized organizing, to cooperative ownership. And I'm just really passionate about helping people both learn about this imagined future and then also learn the skills of how to bring it into being. So that's me. Thank you.
And that's wonderful. Thank you. What a joy, and to listen to you and see how many beautiful things and so many initiatives, more than narratives, initiatives and real things that are already happening. So thank you for sharing. And I would like to invite you and Rabbi Yonatan to ask each other. What would you like to ask each other? Because the two themes are very connected, it seems to us, and it would be interesting what you, Phoebe, would like to ask Rabbi. And by the other end, please, it's with both of you now.
Amazing. I mean, how exciting. Rabbi Yonatan, I'd love to hear how what you've just heard around the SolarPunk future, like what speaks to you about that, and how does it fit with your what you imagine the world needs?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm intrigued by your presentation, and in terms of this balance that you put it about between people, nature, and technology, because it seems like humanity has gone to one extreme of sort of hyper technological, and it's something that Pope Francis talks about in his encyclical Laudato Si, of what he calls the technocratic paradigm. And I mean, I make an effort to walk in nature, and it seems like we need to move sort of take a big step from the amount of time that people spend in front of screens, for example. If we were to keep track of how much time did I spend in nature today and how much time did I spend in front of a screen. So I think for most people living in modern society, it's much more time in front of a screen. So I'm definitely intrigued by your presentation about those three different aspects, and how we can achieve better balance, so that we return to being human beings and not human doings. And I would sort of turn it back to you in terms of what are your thoughts about how we can better achieve that balance?
Well, around the technology, spending more time outside and in nature, I think in order to do that, we have to make it easy, especially for young people to spend time in nature. Like if you have to travel an hour and a half to get into beautiful, pristine nature, then obviously, if it's between playing a video game or spending an hour and a half on the train to get into a forest, then I think it's less about, I think everybody loves to spend time in nature, but I think making it easy, accessible is really important. And there's a big question there around how to increase the number of people spending time in nature without destroying nature, because that everybody going to all of the pristine forests and natural places of beauty means also ecological degradation. So I don't think it's a simple thing. Yeah, I don't have the answer, but I agree with you that the time we spend on technology and in front of screens is bad for our mental health. It also leaves us vulnerable to manipulation by algorithms and by the platforms that we spend time on. So it's a real cause for concern.
Yeah, thanks for what you shared.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for me?
I mean, I'd also just be interested to hear, how did you personally get into this? Did you grow up close to nature? I mean, maybe you could just share a little more of how you became such a ecologically aware human being.
That's a great question. I actually grew up in London, but I'm half Hungarian. And in my summer holidays, I would spend the entire summer holiday in Hungary. And my family in Hungary is from a smaller town with a lot more nature. So I spent my summers, by rivers, camping in forests. And I think that's got a huge amount to do with it. Having those days of totally unstructured time where, we could go out at 9 in the morning and come back at 6 in the evening and just be kind of wild and free with a group of kids, definitely kind of cemented that sense of nature being a mystical and spiritual place, because it's a place where you lose sense of time. You don't have any worries, and I think it for many of us, the places that are magical for us as children are in nature. And I think that's so important, because if we start framing it as like we need to spend more time in nature to optimize our well-being, and it becomes this kind of strategic, structured, timetabled thing, it loses, I really resonate with what you spoke about in your talk, that like at the core of wanting to save the planet, and for me, the core of what drives me is the sense of magic and spirituality, and a sense of the divine and the mysterious. Like, I think there's far more intriguing and mysterious things in nature than on spreadsheets.
I agree.
So, yeah, what about yourself? Did you grow up in spending time in nature?
Yeah, I grew up on land that the Sakhalin and Akalanis native peoples lived on for thousands of years. I grew up near an old growth oak tree that those people harvested the acorns from for hundreds of years. And I grew up next to a creek that was flowing with living waters. I also grew up going to a Jewish summer camp near Yosemite, where I encountered the beauty in Yosemite, and was also introduced to the Native American sweat lodge practice. So yeah, I was blessed to also garden an organic garden that I garden with my mother, and climb into the fruit trees in our orchard and pick the fruit. And then my grandfather would make jam from that fruit. So it's something that I don't have as much living now in the holy city of Jerusalem. But back there, I also didn't have a connection to, the religious leaders that exist here in Jerusalem. So it's yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
Thank you, Rabbi, the sharing with us how you came until today and the inspirations that's brought you in this space of awareness for the nature and connection with spirituality. And I would like to ask the audience, is there any question that you would like to ask directly to Phoebe, to the Rabbi, before we go to the breakout rooms? How is it? Some people here said, it brings me joy. Rieta, please.
I do feel that the perspective of religion and faith is a very historic perspective. And SolarPunk story is a very futuristic perspective. So Rabbi Yonatan, how do you look at future with such a historical, let's say, basis? And then for Phoebe, the other way around, what's the value for history for you?
I mean, in terms of the future, I mean, it's as Helena Norberg Hodge of Sweden wrote in her book Ancient Futures, it's really about it's about drawing on millennia old wisdom that exists in religious and spiritual traditions, and enabling us to live a much brighter future. I think that the ecological and environmental movements over the past 50 years, they haven't succeeded in convincing mainstream society to change its path. And I think part of it is because the sort of the central message is coming out of fear that, look at what we're destroying. But I think that religion offers a hope and this idea that we can protect our common home, because this is creation. This is part of God's good earth, and we're part of that. We're also a creature. In Hebrew, the word for earth is Adamah, and the word for person is Adam. So it's sort of like earth and earthlings. We're all connected to the earth.
My answer to that is that I feel like we haven't had the perfect way of living with the earth historically. Like there have been many different ways of living. There have been civilizations that have collapsed and then been rebuilt. And I think, maybe that's just to say that the future is for us to make, for us to create. And I think we've never had as much knowledge and kind of prowess and technology to really define a peaceful and loving and cooperative way to live on this planet, and to make it work for all people, for all living beings, for all of all future generations. So I think using the good part, the parts from history and from indigenous ways of living and from ancient traditions and religions that can really show us good ways of living on this planet. But I also don't think that when I look into history, I don't see any one way of living that is the best way, that has worked for everyone and has worked the best way possible. So I think it's an exciting thing to look to the future, but also it's good to learn from the past.